I'm going to tell you a story. I had a perfect life. I had a wonderful house, I had an amazing husband, 2 beautiful children. I was a senior vice president. I made the most money I'd been making in my entire life. And I got a phone call. I got a phone call asking me if I'd be interested in a job. And I said, no, thank you. I have a great job. They said, would you mind taking a look at this job? I took a look at the job, and it was actually kind of fascinating. It blended everything I cared about. It was about children, it was about food, it was about hunger. But I still said, I have a perfect life. So I didn't do anything. I got a call 2 weeks later, same person. I know you said no, but would you consider a cup of coffee? And, as you'll learn later about the intoxicating effects of really good coffee from Mokhtar, I said yes. I said yes to a man named Billy Shore, who had been running an organization called Share Our Strength, which was focused on ending childhood hunger in America. And in an hour, over a cup of coffee, I heard things I could not believe. I learned that 16 million children in America go hungry every day. I learned that on snow days, the days that were the most joyful days for my children because they wore snow pants and drank hot cocoa and sledded all day, were days of profound misery for children who relied on school for food. Children who would go to their schools and pull on doors hoping that something would open. I learned about 6-year-old boys who got on bicycles and rode down the side of a highway to get to a feeding station to get a free lunch to bring home to their 4-year-old sister. And in that conversation, in that one cup of coffee, I just learned things that I could not turn back on. So what did I do? I quit my senior vice president job. I took a $75,000 pay cut. I gave up 20 years of working in healthcare into an industry I knew nothing about, simply because it all made sense. It was the moment where it all came together. If I'm gonna work and not be with my children, it should stand for something, it should mean something. And I, if nothing else, am someone who loves to solve problems, and childhood hunger in America is a solvable problem. This is part of my story. Raise your hand if you have a job that you thought you would have when you were a kid. 1, 2, amazing, 3, 4. I love asking this question. Shout out the thing that you thought you were gonna be as a child. I'll start. I thought I was gonna have a hot dog stand in Hawaii. Just telling you, a vast imagination as a child. Everyone just say out loud what you thought you were gonna be as a child. Say what you are now. So you're about to hear extraordinary moments about epiphanies, and yet every single one of us at a point in our life makes a choice to do something different. I am thrilled to invite you into an hour plus of listening to some of the most extraordinary moments of epiphany, moments of I can't turn back and I am gonna make my life to be something else. I'm not gonna bother introducing any of these people because their stories are their introduction into their life. All I can say is turn off your phone. We're not talking about scale, we're not talking about fundraising, we're not talking about anything other than extraordinary human lives and the potential we all have when we see things and we marry them with our imagination and we open ourselves up to the life of possibility. So with that, get comfortable and welcome our first speaker.
Can you hear me? I'm here to talk to you today about scale and fundraising. I'm kidding, of course. So it's my strong suspicion that everybody in this room is running away from something.
Great coat.
I know, that's why I'm here. And everybody in this room is also chasing after something else. We're running away from our past failures. We're running away from feelings of insecurity that tell us we don't deserve to be sitting in rooms like this. with people as beautiful and accomplished as many of you are. We're running away from the weighty expectations of our loved ones and colleagues. We're also chasing endlessly after cures for incurable diseases, solutions to structural issues that plague us across the globe. Some of us are chasing after the feeling of writing our names on the pages of history, and that's okay too. I am. But while we move forward through the inertia of successes and pitfalls, it can be very easy for us to forget why we made these journeys of social entrepreneurship in the first place. My path hasn't always been quite so clear. At the moment, I stand before you as a designer of a brand that uses fashion as a vehicle to tell stories about marginalized populations, people who happen to be on the outskirts of society, people who have been ignored and disregarded historically for reasons none other than the way they look, their ethnicity, or where they happen to be born. My work makes an effort to champion these people, show that they are noble, elegant, and make the point that beauty has no particular hue, border, or passport color. And it's work that has put me on screens. I've been involved with a small independent film some of you may have heard of called Black Panther. It was fine. It's an okay gig. You can forget it. It's all right. But my path hasn't always been quite so clear. Before I embarked on the journey of being like a ridiculous designer clothing person, I was on the even more ridiculous life of being a corporate attorney at a big firm in Philadelphia in the US. And my job was essentially to help prop up large conglomerates that keep their money by silencing the voices of powerless individuals. Also a good gig if you can get it, it's very lucrative. But it tends to keep you up at night endlessly, because for most of us, this isn't what we woke up and thought we wanted to do. I think many of us work really, really hard and we do a really, really good job, a great job. Doing a good or a great job doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing good or great work. So, somebody who has strong convictions, somebody who's relatively creative, somebody who has opinions about fixing the world is not necessarily somebody who's conducive to sitting in a cubicle and figuring out ways to get plaintiffs who've been harmed to go away. I have a specific memory of sitting in a conference room with a room full of well-meaning, wealthy lawyers. We were discussing a specific document about one of our clients. And a partner said we have to be very discreet about the information in this document because if we let it get out, it might reveal how our clients have been harming innocent children. So I'm sitting there like, you're X years old, very accomplished, you spent this time accruing these credentials and this knowledge, and you're essentially, to use a nerdist Star Wars analogy, working on the Death Star, and Darth Vader is your boss. And this is it, really, this is life. And so you have a mortgage, you have a kid, you have a family, but is this essentially what one wants to do with his life, and is this the legacy that we all choose to have? And I think this is a dilemma many of us have. We have organizations we work for, run by well-meaning people, but doing work that is ultimately not beneficial or not a net positive. And so I had to ask myself if this is really what I was here for. I thought not. So instead of spending my time silencing the voices of people who have no power, I set out to do the opposite. I use art to tell stories about people who have smaller voices but large things to say. I think for a lot of us, we think about epiphanies as things that strike us like lightning bolts. We jump out of the tub, we stop mid-thought, and we have a life-changing moment. For me and for many others, I found it's a glacial progression towards enlightenment, if you will. The idea that there are things we can do really well, but then the things we're also made to do. And so bookending this discovery about how I could be a mediocre lawyer working for terrible people, or I could be a champion for the unchampioned, that to me was a story I would rather tell myself, a story I can tell my kids for them to be proud of. The idea that they can say, my dad didn't just make clothes, he made people have better lives for themselves. And by the way, this is not me making things happen. This is me giving people agency, putting them in a vehicle where they're seen as human, nuanced individuals. It's not whitewashing people's stories, it's just showing that they're complete and whole, just as all of us are. So if there's anything I've learned from this, it's the idea that no work is wasted. So in spite of our pitfalls, our accidents, our mistakes, these are all things that make us go harder, further, and better. because they teach us and they inform the next step. So I think, despite the things we run away from, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because they can push us towards the things we should be looking towards. Thank you.
So the format here, after each speaker, I'm going to ask them each a couple of questions. We're going to ask you to hold yours. And if we manage our time carefully, we'll have about 20, 25 minutes at the end to open it up for everyone. You referenced Black Panther.
I did.
So Black Panther, right now, is the highest grossing superhero film ever in America, and the most tweeted about film ever. And yet, it's in an industry where it is rare to see Black filmmakers, Black talent, Black directors, Black anything. I did a little research after I met Walé, and I found out the fashion industry is almost the same. In 203 fashion shows at Fashion Week in New York, 3 were showcasing African American designers. And so my question for you, and we talked about this, think about this juxtaposition in the arts of so much of one color having control over so much of the tapestry of how we learn about beauty and storytelling. Where do we go from here? How do we start to change this narrative?
Sure. So I think the thing when we think about beauty, I'm glad you brought that word up, it's the idea that what is beauty for, what does it do for us? It inspires us to be better, to think about our lives in different abstract and great ways. You walk into a museum, you see a Caravaggio, a Da Vinci, you recognize yourself in it. It's gorgeous. Except you may not recognize yourself because you may be of a certain hue that is not pictured in these museums. You watch a film, you might see a version of yourself, if you do at all, that is a caricature of who you are. You open a magazine, you might see people who are, how to put this tactfully, humanly very unique to the rest of us. So the arts have a great power to inspire. They also have power to make us feel insecure and to make us shrink and to shrink who we are. But representation does the opposite of that. When we allow more of us to come into these spaces, people of different hues, different cultures, different physical shapes, different languages, we're enriched because we all get to learn from each other, and we're all more inspired because our kids can walk into a museum and see a Da Vinci that's gorgeous, but also a Basquiat next to it. And they can recognize that the highest apex of beauty also includes them. And that way, when they think of high art, it's not a discussion that excludes them, whoever they may be. So for me, fashion is, to be frank, I can really talk about clothes. It's really just a vehicle for the idea of inclusion culturally and allowing people of all cultures to share in the discussion about how we can make ourselves better.
Amazing. What's the next step on your career journey?
Scalability and funding. I'm kidding. Honestly, I don't know. It's interesting because this is shockingly an untapped thing. The idea of using art to make people feel better is like gasp. This is not just for money. So like people we don't quite know what to do with this. And for me, it's just about having these conversations and using, it's essentially a sleight of hand. You come for the pretty clothes, you leave for the enlightenment about culture. And so what happens when people with more resources do this on a grander scale? To me, that's where we're in such an era of this for many reasons. And so maybe we have to trick each other into looking at things that make us think about ourselves in more human ways, and that's what art is for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk about intimidation. I woke up this morning and I thought, what do you wear when you're the moderator of a panel and have a fashion designer on? And I went for like the blanket. My Jewish grandmother would call this a shmata. So I'm going to bring our next speaker on, who is going to wow you with her extraordinary story.
Hi. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Bisola Akinmuyiwa from Lagos, Nigeria. Lagos is the biggest city in Africa with 23 million of people hustling to make a living. I was born and brought up in Ituagon community, one of hundreds of informal settlements in the city. I was born into a polygamous family with 2 wives and 11 children. I'm sixth child of the family. I lost my mom at the age of 17 years old. A week later, my dad lost his second wife. Things became difficult for me and my younger siblings. The responsibility became much for my dad to handle. A year after the death of my mom, I finished my secondary school. I had a dream to become a lawyer. My dad wanted to help me, but he asked me to wait for my senior brother to finish his study. I waited 3 years after my senior brother finished his study. My dad lost his job. He told me, my daughter, you have to sponsor yourself in order for you to continue with your education. I began to lose hope. Asked myself, where is my helper? Some months later, my dad introduced me to Mr. Sani, who worked as a community paralegal in Ituagon community. As a member of Nigeria's Slum/Sheep Farmer Settlement Federation, a movement of urban poor for dignity and development, I was able to access free community paralegal training. At the end of 6-month training, I started community presentation by educating people on their rights and render free legal services. As I enjoy what I'm doing, but I face a lot of challenges. Each time I went to police station to help my clients, those police officers do call me small girl. They used to tell me, you this small girl, instead of you being in school learning biology or economics, you are here working as a paralegal. Each time they say things like that to me, I won't argue. I do conclude in my mind that they are trying to intimidate me, so I refuse to be intimidated. As my work and my experience grew, I was chosen to join a special team, paralegals working at mobile court, a court set up to make money from the urban poor by seasoning goods and imposing fine on them, people who are making their living through street trading, hawking, car pusher, waste collector. This is the most challenging work which we paralegals do because we face hostility from the court staff, persecutors, defense lawyer. Everyone were making money from the urban poor. One day, me and my fellow paralegal, Jamil, went to mobile court. We sat down taking note on what our client was saying. One of the persecutors walked closer to us and asked us to follow him. We went straight to mobile court coordinator office. We introduced ourselves as a community paralegal. We present our ID card as an evidence to prove. The coordinator asked us to prove beyond that. We asked him to call the director of JEI, Justice and Empowerment Initiative. Immediately, he looked straight into my eyes and told me, I can't call. Looking at you alone shows that you guys are lying because you are too small to be a paralegal. You're supposed to be in school by now, learning vocational skills. Immediately he said that, I got fired. And I was like, what is this man saying? I have to raise my voice and shout at him. What did you mean? Did you mean I'm too small to work as a community paralegal? Or did you mean I'm too small to advocate for the poor? And I asked him in which section of Nigeria Constitution stated that a so-called small girl can't be what she wants to be. I expressed myself angrily, passed message on who I am and what I'm up to. He got the message and he came down. He called the director of JEI and he confirmed what we said. We were able to continue with our work for the day. I went back to office to give a report on what happened at mobile court. Some of my fellow paralegals advised me. They call you small girl because you cut your hair short like a schoolgirl. That make you look small. Plait your hair and you look big. They will stop calling you small girl. Immediately, I was like, yeah, they're telling me the truth. A week later, I went home and I plaited my hair. I look at mirror of a truth. I look big. But the question is that, did I need to plait my hair before I can present myself as a paralegal? The answer is no. So I had to go back home to cut my hair short. The following day, I went to Mumbai court to my greatest surprise, seeing a man who doesn't believe that I am a paralegal called me my friend with a smile on his face. We exchanged greeting and he told me, I'm proud of you because you know what you want. Immediately, I realized beyond any last doubt that I don't need to plait my hair or live a fake life before I can present myself as a paralegal or before I can achieve my dream. Find myself here at SkollWF from 2018, have my hair short cut, still looking like a small girl. It is a privilege and a proof that the path for me to achieve my dream is to be bold and honest to myself. I would like to say a very big thank you. Thank you.
This is the two small girls. So when we met, you told me your story, small girl. And I think almost any woman in this room has had a small girl moment. What is your advice when women face their version of small girl?
Thank you. My advice is that whenever women face a challenge of being called small girl, don't be intimidated. Refuse to be intimidated. Refuse to accept what they think you are. Try to present yourself and prove that I'm not this, I'm this. Try to show them the true color of who you are. That will make it to go a long way, and it will also help you to achieve your dreams. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question for you. When we met yesterday, you taught me a phrase.
Yeah.
Deep. Can you explain to everyone what that means and why it's important to you?
Tip.
Deep.
Okay. Dear means, is it dear or tip? Okay. Dear means slow and steady. Yeah. And it says dear, it means slow and steady. And for someone to be able to achieve his or her dream, you have to take the step slow and steady in order for you to get what you want and get a perfect result of what you are trying to get. So slow and steady.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Ready? As our next speaker is coming up, raise your hand if you had a cup of coffee today. Wow, look around. Get ready for the most extraordinary story about a beverage you love.
Really excited to be here. Universal greetings of peace, love, and justice. Assalamu alaikum. I'll begin at the beginning. I'm from Yemen by way of the Tenderloin in SF, by way of Brooklyn, New York, by way of Toxis, Liverpool, UK, by way of Yemen. And sometimes I have to have a map to describe my life, especially in America because we don't understand geography that well. I grew up in a small neighborhood called the Tenderloin, and the best way to describe it was by comedian Dave Chappelle, who said, "Ain't nothing tender about that place." It's a very hard place for a young boy to grow up. Lots of violence and difficulties outside of your doorstep, and I think one of the worst things in the world is when young children aren't allowed to dream and to feel that they're boxed in because of the society that they grow up in and because of circumstance. But as a young kid, I loved to read, and that was my way of escaping my reality. In particular, Harry Potter. Shout out to any Harry Potter fans. Wave your wands. And as a kid, it's a pretty powerful book, and a lot of kids relate to it because they feel that maybe I don't belong in this world. Maybe like Harry Hagrid's going to come and save me. And so I grew up actually, my background was in community organizing, and my goal in life was to become a paralegal and then become a lawyer. And I made it I was a paralegal. And so I was trying to finish my undergrad degree while working as a paralegal for a nonprofit that did mostly immigration work. And on the weekends, I worked as a doorman. They called us lobby ambassadors to make us feel better. So my epiphany moment was October 1st, 2013 at 12:02 p.m. It's pretty precise, right? A friend of mine texted me about a statue of a weird Yemeni man drinking coffee next to my work. So I got up and I looked out, and this statue was the symbol of the old coffee company called the Hills Brothers. And I began to research the history of coffee, and I learned that there's an incredible history from Yemen. For those who don't know, there's actually a city, a port called Mokha, and it's the reason why we're here today. And it's a port that changed the world. There is a difference of opinion where coffee begins, in Yemen or Ethiopia. I think I'm the only Yemeni who thinks coffee begins in Ethiopia. There's no Yemenis here, which is great. As an indigenous plant, but the first people to brew coffee and to consume this amazing drink were Sufi monks who lived in the port of Mokha. And in the 1400s, the coffee begins to enter Europe. In coffee houses in Paris and Vienna and London, ideas flourished. There were coffee houses known for musicians, and some for politicians, and some for philosophers. Actually, in Oxford, they called coffee houses here penny universities, because for a penny, you could buy a cup of coffee and learn something about the world. And it's an incredible history in how coffee spread and left through Yemen. And for those interested to learn more about it, there's actually a really good book that talks about the history of coffee. It's called The Monk of Mokha, and I recommend you read it. And so I fell in love with this idea, and I grew up in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And it's hard not to be someone who cares about social justice and someone who's a foodie growing up there. And so I went and I had a cup of coffee, and it was, for me, where my past and future collided at one point. As an immigrant, you sometimes feel that you're stuck between two different worlds. And so I ended up, I already know I'm going to go over a couple of minutes. That's okay. You feel stuck between these two worlds. And so coffee was a way for me to bridge between my Yemeni roots and my American side. And so I didn't know anything about coffee. I went back to Yemen in 2014 to start this idea. And in 1875, Yemen was producing almost 60,000 coffee that was being shipped out of the port of Mokha. And by now, it's less than 10,000 tons, a huge decline. And so I went to Yemen. This is a picture of these beautiful mountain terraces, and you can see it's actually a village on the top of that mountain in the middle, and that's me trying to look like a brown Indiana Jones. But I saw an amazing and wonderful country, villages on the tops of mountains, images that we don't see often of Yemen when we think of Yemen because of what the media portrays Yemen as. And so I wanted people to see something different from my country. I took back samples from Yemen, and I brought them back to learn to evaluate them. I had to become a coffee sommelier, which is another story. And I found two incredible coffees that had incredible flavor profiles. And so I went back to work with these farmers and to work as a community organizer, training them on how to produce better coffee. In the middle of this, war begins. Everything that we consume comes from somewhere, and there's a political reality to that place. And so Yemen was going through a very difficult time that's just got worse and worse. And so I was scheduled to leave to attend a coffee conference in Seattle to showcase the coffee to the world. And before I left, on March 25th, 2015, I woke up and I saw this outside of my window. Yemen went into a regional conflict that's still raging on till today. And they bombed both airports. So there was no way out for me. And I needed to leave to attend this event. And so I went to the port of Mokha, and I took this boat, and I crossed the Red Sea to Djibouti, to Africa. And we hear stories of refugees from Syria or East Africa who go on these ocean journeys, but no one leaves land to go on the ocean unless you have no option. And so I took my samples. This was my getaway selfie. and made it back to the US. And the coffees were really incredible in these blind tastings. And then eventually my coffee made it through to the Port of Oakland. And now my coffee is being showcased around the world in different coffee shops. And for me, I think coffee is an incredible way to build bridges between different cultures. Last year, we were rated as the #1 coffee in the world by the Coffee Review. Thank you. But to Walé's point, like, my goal is to use my work as an agency, as a bridge between other people who are really empowering themselves. I was inspired by Rwanda and how coffee was used as a vehicle to move people from humanitarian aid to economic empowerment post-genocide. And so I believe that, in life, my only two advice I can give, and I don't have much advice to give, I would say that you will only become successful when your passion is greater than your fear. What is the problem that you want to solve in the world? And the amount of passion you have to have for that project is what's product or service is what's going to help you go through those hurdles in life, help you cross your oceans. Because monetary desires aren't going to help you. And the other is, if you pursue your passions, because there's a moment where your hobby, your passion is your hobby, and there's that moment of fear. Do I do this? Do I stick with my 9-to-5 job and go to law school and become a lawyer? But there's a moment when you take that leap of faith. And so a wise person told me this, and he said to me that if you pursue your passions, you'll have two options or two outcomes. Either you'll become an expert in that field and have a thriving business, or you'll become an expert in that field and lead a happy life. And so I think that, finishing my story, I wanted people to have that reaction of Yemen, to see people and children happy. And I think as consumers, my takeaway for you today is that when you buy your next cup of coffee, that you have the opportunity to uplift someone rather than exploit them. And I think that if you understood the incredible journey it takes to get your coffee to get to you, or your clothes, or your things that are made from other countries, it crosses borders and cultures and political hardships to find its way to you. And I think that coffee is a wonderful way for us to build those bridges. Thank you.
Nailed it.
She was my anchor.
We've been having a lot of fun getting to know each other in preparation for this panel. And I have to tell you, there is actually nothing more transformative than a cup of Mokhtar's coffee. It tastes of love and dates and fruit, and it's wonderful. I strongly encourage you to give yourself a chance. You are the protagonist in a book right now, written by Dave Eggers. The book is called Monk of Mokha. What is it like to have your successes and failures chronicled in book and put out into public?
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, and it's honestly awkward to see like your life casually hanging on a bookshelf, But Dave was a great writer, and for me, I wanted to take the opportunity to reclaim my narrative and to push something in the world that's positive. We live in such a divided time, and so even this book, it made it last month on the New York Times bestseller list. You have all these like Trump books and this one weird anomaly. And so I wanted people from, whether you're a kid growing up and having a hard time, or someone who has a job that's not really their passion, to find yourself in these pages and maybe be inspired in some way. I hope that happens.
You showed us gorgeous pictures of Yemen. Tell us one thing that we probably don't know about Yemen that you want everyone to know.
Some of the most hospitable and warmest people you'll ever meet. We would go to villages, and it was the first time I would show up, they would line up one person from each household, and they would do a lottery system to see who gets to host me. Just unbelievable hospitality and warmth, and I'm just happy to be able to use coffee as a way to bridge between us.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
You ready? So we're learning about the transformative power of fashion, advocating for the poor, coffee. What about education? Tell us a story about how education can change lives. Angie.
First disclaimer, Bisola, I didn't need to plait my hair to look big. I think you can see that, I didn't need to do that. And a second disclaimer, fashion. Walé, the dress that I'm wearing here was made by a fellow Kama member called Hamish Abukari. What she said to me, oh, you're going to Skoll Forum. I want to make sure that you're looking appropriate for that forum. So I'm going to make a dress. So Kama is Comfort Alumni Network. On Thursday, the 2nd of July, 1998, I found myself in a room with 400 other young women who had been educated through school and supported by Comfort. And Comfort stands for Campaign for Female Education. They had supported us through school with a bursary. So as we stood in there, we had come together to celebrate this huge feat. We are amongst the first in our villages to have gone that far. And so this was a huge feat to celebrate. But we're also there to talk about, so what's next? We were daunted by the future. Just the idea of what's next. Because Comfort works in the most remote rural districts, where even the ministries of education rarely go to, and are even aware of as much as their schools. So for us, there were no jobs that we could see. We're not just daunted because we didn't really think, we didn't have an imagination, and you didn't really need an imagination to know what would become of you. We knew what was going to happen. Because when we got back to our villages, girls were still dropping out of school. Children were still leaving out of school prematurely because they couldn't afford the cost. Challenges of child marriage, challenges of teenage pregnancy. But look here, everybody in our community was celebrating us with the heroines. Girls had made this huge brag. But we were conflicted because we knew what we were going to become. I recall sitting there in that room when young woman after young woman, when girl after girl was walking up and talking about their stories. I remember thinking, did they steal my script? Because that really sounds like me. And it was the first time that we had met together. We were not aware that there were 400 of us across the country. So just sitting there and realizing from that proximate distance that my story wasn't unique. I wasn't the only one with monopoly on poverty and how it affects women. There was a shared story and a shared narrative in this room. So it wasn't easy. I remember sitting there and looking at one of the girls who was there, Emma. She was wearing this dress, and I was like, if only I had that dress. And please stop judging me. I can see that judging look. So I was thinking, if only I had that dress. It wasn't new. It was a faded dress. It was too big for her. But her aunt had given it to her to come to that meeting. I had come to that meeting wearing my uniform because I had nothing else decent to wear. So you see why this dress matters to me? So just looking at her and feeling envious. But before I really got to settle down about my entitlement to feeling envious and justified to feel like that, then Tendai spoke. Tendai, from the day she left secondary school, a teacher had taken her in because her only surviving grandmother had passed away. And to be honest, I was ashamed of myself. So I was vacillating between feeling sorry for myself and empathy, when all of a sudden there was commotion. We were 400 of us in this room, a room like twice the size of this room. And this man stormed into the room. He was big, and this is relative as well to my size. So he stormed into the room, and this man was shouting. He was very well dressed. He looked like he had money, seriously. But he was shouting. And he was shouting to one of the girls in the room. How dare you ignore me? I've been calling you and you're not listening to me. Do you know that you are nothing without me? The clothes that you're wearing, and now all of a sudden I own you. And so when I say come, you come. I recall feeling outraged. You know when you've got a knot in your throat, but you feel so powerless to challenge this person. And everybody else in the room was recognizing the injustice of it all. And so one of the young facilitators was in the room, stood up and said, look here, sir, you have no right to do that. If you're going to ask this girl to get out, you need to do that through your friends. Long story short, everybody in that room found their voice. They were shouting, they were screaming, they were stamping their foot. Some of us were big stood up. And everyone was like, no, you can't ask her out. After all, do you realize that she's a minor? So some of them tried to appeal to the law. Some of them said, actually, she's young enough to be your daughter. And others were saying, no, but to be honest, whatever you gave her, doesn't matter. What is it? Can we raise it and give it back to you? But just to say that, for me, sitting in that room, when the whole morning we were having a pity party about where we were at and how terrible our lives were, and to sit there and see this room with 400 young women standing up to this hefty, well-dressed, and looking very educated men and saying to him, you're not going to do this as long as we're all here, made me realize our collective power. It made me realize that we might not have the money at that time. We might not have been as educated, Most of us had not gone, to university at that time. And we didn't have even the money to be able to match his. But we were together, the 400 of us. And if he was going to do anything, he had to go through us. So on that very day, that's when we started CAMA, our Comfort Alumni Network. We said we're going to be together. We're going to be there for each other. We're going to support each other through anything. We're going to go back to our communities and use our voices to make everybody understand that you might not have the money, but you've got a lot more that you've got. And we also say that actually, no, they've catapulted us into leadership positions. All of a sudden, we are pace-setters, trendsetters. We're going to use this leadership position, this position of influence to be purposeful role models in our community. And in that meeting, they elected me to become their very first national chairperson. So I had no option. I had to step up my game as much as I really thought initially I was the one who was supposed to be feeling sorry for myself more. So for me, everybody says to me, what are the 3 things that you would tell to any entrepreneur? I'll say 3 things. Number 1, just start. When we started this whole Comfort Alumni Network, it didn't have a name. But one thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to go back and change what we had seen happening. With what we had, with what we knew, with who we were at that time, at that moment. We're not going to wait another day longer. So just start. Don't wait until you've crossed every T and dotted every I. Start. What you have and what you know and who you know is enough. Start. No excuses. The second thing, partner. There are some people that you would think, actually, this is the time for you to settle old scores with. If you're still trying to settle old scores, you don't care enough. You realize that this is not about you. This is about bigger issues at stake. So you will partner. You will partner with some people that you don't really think very well of, because your passion should be able to override any inconveniences that you've got, which gets me to the third point. Be willing to learn and be able to face criticism. Know that actually you don't know everything. You don't know everything, and you need to be able to learn. Be open to having your truth as you know it challenged. And most importantly, know that you are enough and you can do it. So CAMA has always been about getting close to our problems, getting close to our challenges, and realizing that actually we could, and we have done that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Awesome. So, 2 questions for you. The first is, and you give this gorgeous example, right, of how do you honor where you're from? How do you respect your culture and yet challenge it at the same time? Because I think this is something a lot of our entrepreneurs face, and I'm wondering if you have a thought on that.
Definitely. I would say that the Comfort Alumni Network, the young women that I'm representing today, by the way, we rose from 400 members that day to 120,000 members today. So as I stand here and talk to you, Fiona, who is now a lawyer, said to me that we'll be cheering and singing and dancing, so I can hear that in the background. So I'm going to tell you a very brief short story. She's showing me 1 minute, but I come from Africa. For as long as the sun is out, we're fine. So I'm going to tell you about Fatima. Fatima is 19 years old now. She told me this story 3 weeks ago. So Fatima comes from rural Malawi. So she went to the traditional leader, who are the cultural custodians in a community. She's 19. She was supported through school by Comfort from Form 1. She had dropped out 3 times before Comfort supported her. So she said to me, she went to the traditional leader and said, you know, Mafumo, that's the local name for traditional leader. I'm not very happy about what's happening to women in my community. The number of girls who are dropping out of school, you know, the challenges that we continue to face. I think the things we need to change. And he said to him, look here, baby girl, small girl, eh?
Small girl.
Look here, you were born when we were doing this. Your father, I can guarantee, was born when we were doing this. Your father's father, your great-grandfather. And you are just a small girl. You know, you are a baby. How can you tell me what to do? And she said, okay, I agree with you. You have been doing this all this time. And yes, my father's father, my grandfather, and everybody else before me have seen you do this. And she said, but I don't think that this works. And he said to her, aren't you a teacher? You are now a teacher, a qualified teacher, right? Would you have become a teacher if this was not working? And so Fatima, long story short, she said to him, look here, sir, if I showed you the scars that I have got and the wounds that I have got for just trying to get through the barriers that are in this community for women, you would be shocked. But unfortunately, it's not physical. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's the torture that I go through to become who I am right now. So, and say, all respect, but you're not a woman. I'm a girl, so I understand this problem here better than you. So he said, okay, fine, that's the point. Can I listen to you? Well, they spoke for a long time, and she said to him, this is how I've become a teacher. And she even said, that's why you don't have as many teachers, because you need to realize that some of the things that we are doing here is not really working. Now, you know what happens? So the chief said, all the other traditional leaders, please come. Next time you're going to have a discussion about how to support girls, how to work with women, make sure Fatima is there. She's now our teacher, not just for the children, but also for us. So for me, yes, with respect, and when you've got the bottom line, which is the red line, that actually this is not right, you can find your way to turn somebody who is a potential distractor to a champion. It works.
If you close your eyes at night and you see the most beautiful dream of all girls in Africa being educated, what happens in Africa that doesn't happen now?
Oh, please don't go there. All right. By the way, I need to also state that that man that walked on stage that day, it was a skit. He was brought in to be able to assist us to reflect on what we thought was a barrier and how, you know, on the fact that we felt weak when we're not really weak. So it worked that he used that. So you asked me my dream for Africa. I need to close my eyes on this. I've always said that Zimbabwe is my birthplace. Africa is my home, and the world is my village. I believe passionately in the power of education because it changed my life totally. If I told anybody I would be in this room speaking in English on this stage, they would have sent me to the psychiatric unit. So I'm standing here, and my vision for Africa, let me just use that, because it's also the vision for the organization that I work for the vision for Kama, because I believe with every iota of my bone in that vision. Our vision is a world in which each and every child is educated, protected, respected, valued, and can grow up to turn the tide of poverty unashamedly and unapologetically. That's my vision for Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more story for you. And it is a story about second chances. John.
When I was 20 years old, my girlfriend was raped in New York City. In my anger and anguish over what happened to her, I went and confronted the man who raped her, and I took his life. I was sentenced to 30 years in prison, of which I had to serve 10 before I would be eligible for parole. I served 16 years in total. I spent almost all my 20s, almost all my 30s incarcerated in New York State. And almost 10 years ago to the day, I was granted parole. And I was eventually released on Earth Day on April 22nd. So it's my 10-year anniversary month, actually this month. 10 years ago, I was terrified about coming home. Of course I wanted to come home. And I was terrified not just because I'd never seen the internet or email or a smartphone. I was terrified because I thought the world would never accept me. So I made a choice that I would be anonymous and that I would hide and that I'd use my network, my relationships to get a job, a good place to live, and live out my days and put the past behind me as best I could. And that's what I did pretty well for the first 9 months I was home. Then my sisters signed me up for a training program in Manhattan. It was a leadership development training, and they thought that it would be great for me, and that I would be great for it, is actually what they said. And the facilitator on the second day of this 3-day training introduces an exercise called the fear exercise. And essentially, the exercise was a discussion, and then people would answer or complete the sentence, I am afraid of. And he says, let me give you a powerful example of fear. He said, we went to a prison in Texas where 8 out of 10 people who were released were going back within 1 year. After 5, 10, 15, 20 years of serving time, they would come right back in. So they asked them, and over again they said, I'm more afraid to be out in society and face the judgment, rejection, discrimination, and even hatred of people than I am to be in prison where everyone is like me and I can live with my guilt and my shame. When I think about that, that was my reality. And he used that example, and then he made a joke. And he said, of course they want to go back to prison. They get 3 meals a day. They live rent-free. They don't have to pay for the gym. And they get sex from time to time. And I heard that as condoning rape in prison. I'm not sure that that's what he meant. But in that moment, I felt I had ex-con written on my forehead, that I had been exposed. I felt unsafe, even threatened in the room. And he calls a break. And I step out into Midtown Manhattan during the break because I decided to leave. I couldn't stay there anymore. And I called my sisters, and I did something called 3-way, which I had never done before. And I'm there crying, apologizing for having pushed me to take this training before I was ready. And in that moment, I said, I've never given up. I survived 16 years in prison. There's no way I'm leaving this training. I'm going back in that room, and I'm going to raise my hand. And if I'm one of the 10 people that he calls on, I'm going to tell the entire room my story. And I went back in, and I was the 10th person selected. There were 5 people on this side on a microphone, another 5 on the other side. People said, I am afraid of my mother, my father, my boss, failure. And I got up to the microphone, and before I had said a word, a woman in the front row started crying. Then a second person. I think they could feel what it took for me to step up on that stage. They could feel the fear that I was holding in as best I could. And I told them my story, why I had gone to prison, and that I realized that day that for 9 months I had put myself back in prison by hiding away from the world, hiding my past, and hoping no one would discover it. And I said, today I realize that I am perfect as I am. Whether you accept me or not, whether you judge me, reject me, discriminate against me, or even hate me, I know that I can do good in the world. And I know that I can make a difference the way I did while I was incarcerated. Today, I'm the first formerly incarcerated CEO of a nonprofit with a global mission. As others have said, I never imagined that I would be on this stage or that I'd be a CEO. But I believe what my father told me when I reconnected with him during my incarceration. He said, accept full responsibility for what you did, seek to make amends, and say yes as much as you can, and you will find meaning and purpose and be free. That day, I regained my freedom. And I left the job that I was working in and entered the nonprofit world believing that I could be a voice for second chances. And I'm so grateful and honored to be part of this Skoll community that embraces leaders like me with lived experience, believing our voices add value to the cause for justice. Thank you very much.
We have talked several times. I was like, I swear I'm not going to cry when he tells it again. And I did. So there you go. You told me a story when you moved to Boston about settling in. And it stayed with me because and I want you to tell the story, but I guess my question for you, once you tell the story, is how do we start to really embrace this idea of second chances in a more systemic way? And you tell the story, or I can, but that's my question.
Yeah, when I took this job with YouthBuild, I left New York City, and I'd been home at that point 8.5 years. And it never occurred to me that when I applied for an apartment in Boston, that I would have to check a box on an application that indicated that I have a criminal record. And so I was denied an apartment. And our pro bono attorneys at YouthBuild advocated for me and shared the press release, and I had been on TV and in the Boston Globe, and they wouldn't budge. They said, we will not make an exception, although we're not concerned about you. Having a criminal record is a life sentence. And I can't get like that global pass at the airport. I can't adopt children. There's so many things that I can't do. And I know that I have to live with that the rest of my life. But it was such a poignant, powerful experience to be reminded what all the young people of YouthBuild and our family and their families go through every day. And I believe that no one should be defined only by the worst thing that you've ever done, but by who you are today and who you can be the rest of your life.
Tell us, Brian Stevenson started us off at the Skoll Reform, and he talked so much about the long tail of incarceration, right? And you've just given us an incredible example. What can this is an issue we get a lot of questions about, particularly from folks who aren't from the States, although if you live in the States, you feel the same way. Can you tell us about some things that are underway that are trying to transform the system of incarceration in the States, maybe some specific ones that you're involved in?
You know, I'm not really encouraged by and hopeful about the transformation of our criminal justice system. I think every advance that we've made has been hit and knocked us a few steps back. I think that's the reality that needs to be said out loud. However, I'm very encouraged by what we're talking about here at Skoll related to proximity, which is ironic for me. Being incarcerated, you didn't want to be proximate to anyone. And I'm still very afraid of crowds. It was the most dangerous time when you were walking in a corridor in a crowded space when you were incarcerated. And I still have that anxiety. So it's really hard for me to even be standing here and being part of the forum. And when I think about the millions, and Brian Stevenson said it, who are not just in prison, but under supervision, who live with this fear constantly. And even Jess said this as well in her remarks, a world where we're not afraid of people's judgment and rejection, and the courage that it takes for me and others to share our stories, knowing that someone will likely not accept me. And needing to tell that story over and over again is important because I believe it frees people and creates a space for people to let go of the past. And I think I'll continue to do that as best I can, and I hope others will, and perhaps that will change the world.
Thank you. Thank you. So I believe we've managed our time reasonably well. Thank you, timekeepers. And we have time for some questions in the room. So if you just throw your hand up, if you've got a question, we'll figure out how to work with mics and speakers all sitting up here. Do you have any questions? Yes, please.
It's a question, a funny question for our last speaker. If I get your name correctly, John. Come to Pakistan. There, nobody will ask you these things. Yeah, there is no such thing as record. There is no such thing, nothing. So, and in Pakistan, the law is if somebody rapes your woman, you have a right to kill. It's justified.
Thank you. So, John, you have a new home in Pakistan if Boston proves too cold in the winter. Jen.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you. I think we all in this room feel this session has been extraordinary. And I wanted to ask the question of each of you of what has it been like? It is, I know every year Skoll does this, brings young leaders. And just briefly, what has your experience been in this week?
Thank you. All right, we'll just go down the line. Your experiences this week.
This week for me has been phenomenal and amazing. And I think it kind of like reminds you that I'm a member of a Camfed Alumni Network, which is a network of young people that have been supported through school. We call each other sisters and brothers. But this reminded me why, for me, the world is my village, that we're not alone. I think there's universality in the challenges that we share and in the solutions that we're bringing to the table. And I think we need to all keep in mind the issues around respect, around proximity, around the power of sharing our personal stories, and definitely second chances and opportunities.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Oh, here we go. Everyone else?
I can just this event right now, it's just so inspirational. There isn't a single person who spoke that didn't move me. And to be in a room also with people who are like-minded, who want the world to be impacted positively. And then find people who actually have knowledge and experience that can help you make that goal happen. Whether it's, say, scaling a funding or just figuring out your why. But that's my short answer.
Yeah, my experience and what I feel is amazing because let me look in the perspective of when I get here, we're like, you have to network, and I begin to ask myself, what is the power of network? What did they mean by network? How are they doing it? So I just have to started learning and begins to ask. I can see my mentor, Megan Chapman, begins to ask her, how are they doing it? What did they mean by network? Who are the people here? So he started giving me a word of advice, step that I have to take before I can network. So to my own greatest surprise, I find myself, at least I'm not good in networking, but at least I can network. To make people to know the kind of movement which I'm into, what I have, and how we can also move further to bring the world, to bring smile into the face of the poor one. I think it is a great time and a privilege for me to be here. Thank you.
So there are a million reasons to be afraid right now. You look at the news, I mean, count them all. But then you come to a place like this, and probably literally everybody you speak to makes you be appreciative of life, of promise, of opportunity, and they remind you of why you do the work that you do. I mean, like, these guys are like, I need to be a better human being, clearly. And it's wonderful to be reminded of that, and to just, there is promise in the world, there's a spark. There is always a tomorrow, even if the leader of the free world makes you think that perhaps there will not be.
For me, I would just add that this week has been affirming, and Angie said it well. Just to be reminded that I'm enough, that I don't need to be anyone else because everyone else is already taken, and just knowing that I'm enough, that I belong here. And it's kind of cool when you wear the name tag, even if in the street someone sees the name tag and they're a fellow Skoll community member, and they just smile at you. And in a world where I'm very often afraid, to see people smiling at you and to be reminded that you're enough has been fantastic.
So we have just a couple of minutes left, and I know you'll share in the feeling that I have of this extraordinary, this is a gift, right? Just to get to listen to people and what they've been through and what they believe in. I did a little bit of homework for this session, which was, in retrospect, really kind of a waste, because there's nothing better than just listening to stories. But the Skoll Foundation is in Palo Alto. It's the home of Stanford University, and there are these two extraordinary professors there in the design school who teach a class all about designing your ideal life. And there's this book that I brought along with me to tell you about. It's called Designing Your Life: How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life. And I think one of the things that really struck me in getting to know all of our speakers is not only have they taken these extraordinary risks to change their life, but they're all filled with joy. And so I'm going to make a plug for making sure you have a lot of joy in your life, because it matters. And the other thing that this one page that I earmarked that meant a lot, I think, when you think about how you create your right journey, are 5 things that you need to embrace: curiosity, bias to action, reframing, awareness, and radical collaboration. And the words jump through too when you think about the threads that pull some of these stories together. Some of the most extraordinary people you will meet at Skoll have embraced those 5 principles. This is a book that's actually meant to be worked on together. So if you met people you loved at the Skoll World Forum, buy the book together and do the work together. It's extraordinarily rewarding. So I had one more career epiphany after the one I shared with you, and it was the moment that I got to meet Jeff Skoll, and never ever in a million years dreamt that I would be asked to be a part of this kind of a world. I'm eternally grateful for it, and I'm so grateful for all of you for coming today. Thank you.